The first and most profound reason a married man may decide to be unfaithful begins inside his own psychological landscape, long before any external temptation appears. Carl Jung believed that much of human behavior is shaped not by conscious intention, but by the hidden, unexplored, and often unacknowledged layers of the psyche. Within the context of a marriage, these hidden layers can become increasingly active when a man feels a growing distance between the life he is living and the life he imagines he should be living. This internal conflict creates a psychological split. One part of him remains committed to the stability, duties, and expectations of the marriage, while another part yearns for self-expression, excitement, and emotional recognition. When these two parts collide without resolution, infidelity may become the path of escape rather than the result of a deliberate plan. As time passes in a marriage, responsibilities increase, roles become routine, and certain aspects of a man's inner world start to feel muted. Jung referred to this as the shadow, the collection of desires, impulses, emotions, and potentials that a person suppresses because they do not align with the image they must display to the world. In early stages of marriage, a man may feel energized, passionate, and motivated, but as the years go by, his identity becomes more tied to duty than desire. The version of himself that once felt free and vividly alive begins to fade behind the layers of expectations, providing, performing, succeeding, protecting, meeting standards. The marriage may still be functioning, but internally, part of him begins to feel neglected. Not necessarily by his partner, but by himself. This internal neglect slowly becomes an emotional hunger. A man who feels unseen within his marriage often feels unseen within himself as well. He may start to sense that the man he has become is incomplete or disconnected from his authentic nature. Jung believed that every person seeks psychological wholeness, and when someone feels cut off from important aspects of who they are, they begin searching for something or someone to fill that void. For a married man, the affair is not always about passion or romance. It is often an attempt, misguided, unconscious, and destructive, to reconnect with a buried part of himself. In many cases, the married man does not fully understand what he is missing or why he feels the way he does. The emotional turbulence inside him is not always articulate. It may manifest as restlessness, boredom, frustration, or a desire for freedom. He may start to feel trapped not by his spouse, but by the version of himself that he believes he must maintain. The role of husband, father, provider, or leader becomes heavy, and instead of seeking support or self-reflection, he seeks escape. Jung emphasized that humans often choose escape over confrontation when facing the deeper truths of their psyche feels overwhelming. And so, the man who cannot confront his own inner emptiness may try to outrun it. When a new person enters his life, someone who sees him differently, listens to him differently, or ignites a feeling he has not felt in years, this inner conflict intensifies. It is not always the person themselves that becomes irresistible, but what they represent. They become a symbol of the freedom he once felt, the youthfulness he thinks he has lost, the spontaneity he misses, or the emotional validation he craves. They awaken the shadow, the parts of him he buried, passion, creativity, desire, sensitivity, or even vulnerability. With this awakening, the split within him grows wider. On one side is the man who honors his marriage and wants to be responsible. On the other is the man who feels alive again in ways he thought were gone forever. This internal split is not created by the outsider. It existed long before she appeared. She merely triggers it into visibility. Jung noted that people often project their unmet needs onto others, idealizing them as the solution to their internal dissatisfaction. The married man may believe he is drawn to the person, but in truth, he is drawn to the part of himself that he sees reflected in her presence. She becomes the mirror of his forgotten self, the part that wants to breathe again. The more intense this feeling becomes, the more he becomes convinced that his dissatisfaction is caused by something outside of himself, his marriage, his spouse, his routine, rather than recognizing that it is a psychological fracture within him. In marriages where emotional intimacy has declined, this inner world becomes even more active. Many men struggle to communicate their emotional needs, partly due to societal conditioning that discourages vulnerability. They begin carrying unspoken disappointments, desires, and fears. Jung believed that unspoken internal conflicts will eventually express themselves through behavior, even destructive behavior, if the individual does not address them consciously. Infidelity becomes a behavioral expression of an emotional truth that the man has never found the courage or clarity to articulate. He seeks outside validation because he has not been validating himself. Furthermore, when a man's inner world is not nurtured, he may develop a sense of invisibility within his marriage. He may feel that his efforts go unnoticed, that his emotional needs are insignificant, or that his identity has been reduced to functions rather than feelings. This invisibility creates a deep longing to be seen not for what he does, but for who he is. An outsider, unburdened by years of routine or responsibility, may provide him with the feeling of being admired, appreciated, or desired. These feelings become intoxicating because they touch the deepest parts of his psychological hunger. In Jungian terms, the affair represents a symbolic attempt to bridge the gap between his current self and the self he longs to reclaim. He may tell himself that he is searching for excitement, sexual fulfillment, or emotional connection, but beneath all these surface explanations lies a more profound truth. He is searching for himself. Infidelity becomes a misguided journey of self-discovery, a destructive attempt to heal an internal wound with an external solution. But because the wound is internal, the solution can never truly satisfy him. There is also the possibility that a man becomes unfaithful not because he is unhappy with his marriage, but because he is unhappy with the version of himself within it. The marriage may be stable, loving, and supportive, but if he feels he has lost a sense of purpose, identity, or vitality, he may still be vulnerable to external connection. Jung believed that individuals often sabotage what is good in their lives when they cannot reconcile who they are with who they want to be. The affair becomes a rebellion against his own stagnation rather than a rebellion against his spouse. Over time, this internal conflict can distort his perception. He may begin rationalizing his behavior, telling himself stories to justify what he knows is wrong. He deserves to feel alive. He has sacrificed too much. He is misunderstood. He has waited too long to feel this kind of connection again. These justifications are not truths. They are the voice of the shadow trying to break through. But because he lacks introspection, he confuses the voice of the shadow with the voice of destiny. Ultimately, the decision to be unfaithful is rarely born from a single moment. It is the result of years of unresolved inner conflict, suppressed desires, emotional neglect, and a growing disconnect between the man he appears to be and the man he feels inside. The affair is not the cause of his psychological split, it is the consequence of it. And while the external act of infidelity may seem like a betrayal of the spouse, the deeper betrayal is the one he has committed against his own self by refusing to confront the truths buried within him. The second reason a married man may decide to be unfaithful lies in the way he unconsciously projects his unmet needs, unresolved wounds, and hidden longings onto another person. According to Carl Jung, projection is one of the most powerful psychological forces within human relationships. It is the tendency to attribute one's internal emotions, desires, or fears onto someone else, especially when those internal aspects feel too uncomfortable or too unfamiliar to confront directly. When a man feels emotionally starved, misunderstood, or disconnected from himself, he may not immediately recognize these feelings as originating from within. Instead, he begins looking outward, searching for something or someone that mirrors back what he is missing. Infidelity, in many cases, is not about the person he is drawn to, but about the part of himself that he believes she reflects. She becomes the symbol of a void he cannot name, a wound he cannot heal, or a need he cannot articulate. Jung emphasized that the psyche is constantly seeking balance. When a person's emotional life becomes lopsided, too much responsibility and not enough freedom, too much giving and not enough receiving, too much control and not enough vulnerability, the unconscious begins pushing those neglected parts outward in the form of projection. The married man begins to idealize someone else not because she is fundamentally better, but because she activates the lost or silenced parts within him. Often, A man who seeks emotional or romantic connection outside his marriage feels an internal emptiness that has grown quietly over time. This emptiness may stem from feeling unappreciated, from long-standing emotional disconnect, or from wounds left unaddressed since childhood, wounds he may not even be aware of. Many men carry unresolved issues from their upbringing, such as the desire for approval, recognition, or nurturing. If these needs were never fulfilled, he unconsciously seeks partners who seem capable of filling these gaps. The affair partner becomes not just a romantic figure, but a symbolic healer, someone who represents comfort, admiration, or emotional warmth. But because projection is not conscious, the man mistakenly believes that she is the source of the feelings awakening inside him, when in truth she is the mirror. She reflects back to him the feelings he desperately wants to experience within himself: confidence, desirability, vitality, or emotional safety. Her presence activates something dormant. This is why people often describe affairs as intoxicating or electrifying. They are experiencing an emotional rebirth, but they confuse the catalyst with the cause. Within marriage, emotional patterns often become rigid. Couples fall into routines, communication becomes transactional, and deeper conversations may become rare. Emotional needs, if unspoken, go unmet. A man may struggle to express tenderness, vulnerability, or insecurity within his marriage because he fears judgment or rejection, or because he believes that maintaining strength is his role. When he suppresses these vulnerable parts, they do not disappear, they simply retreat into the unconscious. Then, when a receptive person appears, someone who listens without expectation or sees him without filtering him through years of domestic tension, these hidden emotions surge to the surface. Jung wrote about the Nema, the inner feminine side of a man's psyche, the part that longs for emotional connection, intuition, creativity, softness, and depth. If a man does not acknowledge his anima, he becomes vulnerable to projecting it onto a woman outside his marriage. She becomes the embodiment of everything he has denied within himself. He may describe her as magical, special, or unlike anyone else he has met, but what he is truly experiencing is the sudden encounter with his own unlived inner life. He sees in her what he cannot see in himself: the capacity for emotional intimacy, tenderness, passion, or sensitivity. This projection creates a powerful illusion. The affair partner becomes idealized, placed on a psychological pedestal. He attributes to her qualities she may not fully possess, because these qualities originate from his unmet internal needs. This illusion can be so strong that he convinces himself that the connection is destined or fated, that it is deeper or more significant than anything he has experienced before. But Jung would argue that what feels like destiny is often the pull of the unconscious, trying to restore emotional balance. Another layer of projection involves unresolved wounds. Many men enter marriage with emotional scars that have never been acknowledged. Rejection, abandonment, shame, inadequacy, or emotional neglect. Marriage, with its closeness and familiarity, can sometimes trigger these wounds, especially during conflict or communication gaps. Instead of recognizing the pain as old and internal, the man may begin to believe that the marriage itself is the source of his discomfort. When a new woman enters his life offering attention, admiration, or acceptance, she feels like the antidote to the emotional pain he imagines is coming from his spouse or his current life. In reality, she is soothing a wound that predates the marriage. Her presence acts as a balm, creating a temporary sense of relief, validation, or importance. The man may begin to think that she understands him better, sees him more clearly, or values him more deeply than his spouse does. But the truth is more complex. She is responding to the parts of him he does not show at home, the parts he only reveals when the stakes are low, when he is not burdened by responsibilities, and when he feels safe enough to express vulnerability. Within marriage, he may fear being judged or disappointing his partner. With someone new, he is free from those fears, and therefore he appears more open, more sensitive, and more emotionally expressive. It is not that she sees him more fully, it is that he shows her parts of himself he has suppressed elsewhere. Projection also plays a role in the reverse direction. Just as he projects his unmet needs onto her, he may also project negative qualities onto his spouse. He begins to view his marriage through a distorted lens, focusing only on what is lacking, what is frustrating, or what is predictable. He may exaggerate the flaws or shortcomings of his spouse in order to justify the emotional pull he feels towards someone else. In Jungian terms, this is the shadow of projection, where the man attributes his own dissatisfaction, fears, or emotional avoidance onto his partner. Instead of recognizing his own emotional distance, he perceives her as the distant one. Instead of seeing his own internal disconnection, he interprets the marriage as disconnected. This distortion allows him to escape the discomfort of confronting his inner wounds by blaming external circumstances. As the projection deepens, the affair becomes a psychological refuge. He turns to the other woman for emotional warmth, validation, or excitement, but beneath these relational dynamics lies his subconscious desire to feel whole. Infidelity becomes a symbolic attempt to reclaim the missing pieces of his identity. He may feel more youthful, more confident, or more appreciated, not because the other woman changes him, but because she reflects the parts of himself he cannot access within his current emotional environment. However, projection is inherently unstable. Because the woman is carrying the weight of his unmet needs, the illusion cannot sustain itself forever. When reality eventually emerges, when challenges arise, expectations shift, or fantasy meets responsibility, the projection begins to crack. Yet before reaching this point, the emotional intensity of the projection can be strong enough to drive the man into making choices that contradict his values, break his commitments, or threaten his marriage. In this sense, the unfaithful man is not merely seeking another person, he is seeking emotional wholeness. But because he does not understand the psychological roots of his actions, he believes that the solution lies outside of him. Projection blinds him to the fact that the feelings he attributes to the new relationship could have been cultivated within his marriage, within himself, or through personal growth had he been willing to face his emotional wounds. Infidelity, when driven by projection, is less an act of betrayal and more an act of psychological displacement. He is trying to fulfill internal needs with external solutions. He is trying to heal old wounds through new experiences. He is seeking emotional connection without first creating emotional awareness. And although the affair may temporarily satisfy his longing for validation or connection, it ultimately fails to resolve the deeper issue, the unresolved parts of himself that he continues to project outward. The third reason a married man may decide to be unfaithful is rooted in the symbolic meaning of the affair itself. From a Jungian perspective, an affair is rarely just a physical or emotional act. It is a manifestation of a deeper psychological imbalance, a sign that something within the man's inner world is out of harmony. Affairs often arise not because the marriage is failing, but because the man's psyche is attempting to correct an inner dissonance he has ignored for far too long. The infidelity becomes a symbolic expression of internal chaos he cannot verbalize, a search for lost autonomy, or an attempt to revive parts of himself that he believes have been swallowed by routine, duty, or emotional stagnation. In every person, there exists a natural desire for wholeness, a need for the different parts of the self to be integrated into a balanced psychological state. For a man living within the structured environment of marriage, with its responsibilities, expectations, and long-term commitments, this balance can slowly erode without him noticing. He may continue fulfilling his roles with outward consistency, provider, protector, partner, yet inwardly begin to feel disconnected from his spontaneity, his dreams, his sense of freedom, or his individuality. Over time, this disconnect becomes a pressure within the psyche, an internal tension seeking release. Jung believed that when a person suppresses essential parts of their identity, those hidden parts eventually erupt in ways that feel uncontrollable. For some, the eruption takes the form of anger, depression, or withdrawal. For others, it takes the form of infidelity. The affair becomes a symbolic rebellion against the constraints he feels trapped by. Not necessarily constraints imposed by his spouse, but constraints imposed by life, responsibility, and the identity he has constructed over the years. At some point, the man may begin to feel that he has become too predictable or too defined by his roles. He may believe he has lost the parts of himself that once felt alive: creativity, youthfulness, passion, independence. When he meets someone who reawakens these dormant aspects, it can feel like rediscovering a missing fragment of his own soul. The affair becomes a metaphor. It represents the lost self calling out to be acknowledged. There is a profound psychological truth that many men face in marriage. As stability increases, mystery decreases. Stability is comforting, grounding, and deeply valuable, but it can also create a sense of sameness that suffocates parts of the psyche that thrive on exploration and novelty. The mind starts to crave spaces where it can breathe freely without the weight of expectations. When this craving goes unaddressed, the man may unconsciously seek out situations that introduce unpredictability and excitement. The affair, therefore, is not just an act of desire, it is an attempt to reconnect with the unpredictable aspects of life that he has suppressed in order to maintain order. Jung spoke often about the symbolic life, the internal world of emotions, imagination, and meaning that feeds the soul. A man who neglects his symbolic life, who lives only in routines, responsibilities, and external accomplishments, may begin to feel psychologically starved. He may outwardly appear successful, yet inwardly feel empty or disconnected. The affair, then, symbolizes his attempt to reconnect with meaning, to feel something that breaks through the numbness of routine. It becomes a flawed attempt at soul renewal, a misguided effort to fill the gap between who he has become and who he secretly wishes he remained. A significant part of this imbalance comes from the loss of autonomy. Many men, as they progress through marriage and family life, feel their personal freedom shrinking. Decisions become shared, sacrifices become normal, and personal desires take a backseat to collective goals. While this is natural and often necessary, some men internalize this shift as a loss of identity. They begin to feel more like a function than a person, someone who works, provides, and serves, rather than someone who dreams, explores, or chooses freely. The affair becomes a symbolic reclaiming of autonomy, a temporary escape from the identity that feels too fixed. Through the affair, he convinces himself that he still has control, that he can still choose something purely for himself, even if the choice is destructive. Jung explained that when a person feels psychologically constrained, they may create an opposing force within their psyche. If the man feels overly controlled by life, the opposing force becomes desire for freedom. If he feels overly burdened, the opposing force becomes desire for lightness. If he feels overly needed, the opposing force becomes desire for independence. The affair partner often embodies this opposing force. She represents what feels missing or inaccessible within his everyday life. But she is not actually the solution, she is a symbol of the inner imbalance. Over time, unresolved psychological tensions create a buildup of internal energy. Jung believed that the psyche strives for release when tension becomes too great. This release may come through creativity, self-reflection, communication, or life changes. But if the man lacks emotional awareness or avoids introspection, the release may come through impulsive actions. Infidelity becomes one such release, not because it is what he truly wants, but because it is the path of least resistance for an unexamined psyche. Within the affair, the man may experience feelings he has suppressed: desire, vulnerability, excitement, emotional openness, or rebellion. These feelings can be intoxicating not because of the other person, but because they symbolize parts of himself returning after years of silence. The affair becomes a form of psychological compensation. Where life feels controlled, the affair feels free. Where life feels monotonous, the affair feels exhilarating. Where life feels predictable, the affair feels spontaneous. Unfortunately, these feelings are temporary illusions because they are rooted in internal imbalance, not external truth. Another dimension of the symbolic nature of infidelity is the attempt to escape the self. When a man feels overwhelmed by responsibilities, unresolved emotional wounds, or dissatisfaction with his own growth, he may seek an escape. Instead of confronting his fears, insecurities, or unhappiness, he runs from them into the arms of another person. The affair becomes a symbolic act of avoidance. The man runs away not from his marriage, but from himself. In Jungian psychology, avoidance always leads to shadow behavior, where suppressed parts of the psyche erupt in damaging ways. Infidelity is one of the clearest expressions of shadow-driven behavior. actions that the conscious self cannot justify but the unconscious self feels compelled to pursue. The affair may also symbolize a crisis of meaning. The man may reach a point in life where he questions his purpose, his achievements, or the path he has taken. He may feel that he has not become the man he once imagined. This existential discomfort creates a longing for transformation. Instead of seeking transformation through personal growth, introspection, or communication, he seeks it through an external relationship. The affair symbolizes a new beginning, a fantasy of renewal. But because it is rooted in illusion, not conscious transformation, it ultimately deepens the psychological split rather than resolving it. The symbolic nature of an affair also lies in the man's attempt to revive emotional parts of himself he believes have been lost. Many men associate their younger selves with passion, boldness, spontaneity, or a sense of possibility. As life becomes more structured, these traits fade into memory. When a new connection sparks something within him, laughter, desire, inspiration, he feels alive again. The affair symbolizes youth regained, identity rediscovered, masculinity reclaimed. But these are internal qualities, not external gifts. The affair only reflects the man's longing for who he once was or who he wishes he were. Ultimately, the affair symbolizes the man's internal struggle with identity, desire, responsibility, and emotional fulfillment. It expresses the imbalance between who he is and who he wants to be. The external act of infidelity becomes a mirror reflecting the deeper truths. He has refused to face truths about his dissatisfaction, his unaddressed wounds, his unmet emotional needs, and the parts of his psyche that have been ignored or suppressed. In the end, a married man's decision to be unfaithful is rarely a simple matter of desire or impulse. It emerges from a complex inner world that he may not fully understand himself, a world shaped by suppressed emotions, unacknowledged wounds, unmet needs, and a growing disconnect from his authentic identity. Jung reminds us that human behavior is deeply influenced by the unconscious, and infidelity is often a symptom of an internal imbalance long before it becomes an external act. The affair becomes a mirror, reflecting back the hidden parts of his psyche, the longing for vitality, the hunger for emotional recognition, the search for the self he believes he has lost. It is a misguided attempt to heal through escape what can only be healed through awareness. And while the betrayal is real, painful, and destructive, the deeper tragedy lies in the man's failure to confront his own inner truth. Until he is willing to face the shadow he carries, no external connection, no matter how intoxicating, can offer him the wholeness he seeks.